I shall not be moved. Anchored in Jehovah, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. I shall not be, I shall not be moved. I shall not be, I shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the water. I shall not be moved. In his love abiding, I shall not be moved. And in him confiding, I shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the water. I shall not be moved. I shall not be, I shall not be moved. I shall not be, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. I shall not be, I shall not be moved. I shall not be, I shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the water. I shall not be moved.
All right. Welcome to the Waycast. We are in Genesis chapter 16 tonight. I know you might be getting confused from all the jumping around. We're skipping chapter 15 because we did chapter 15 last week, I think. But,
Yeah.
And so with precepts upon precepts. So we are going from chapter 14 to chapter 16. I hope that you will listen to chapter 15 before you go on to chapter 16, and we'll have continuity there. And if unless you're in the precepts upon precepts class, and then I hope that you've already listened to or watched chapter 15 already as part of the class. And so if you will, I ask that you the theme for chapter 16 is Sarah's suggestion, Hagar flees, and the test of Abraham. And this is section verses 1 through 5.
As we come to this chapter, I must confess that I almost wish that it were not in the Bible. Okay, J. Vernon.
Why couldn't God leave it out?
Yeah. After Abram rose to the heights in chapter 15, you would say that he certainly is treading on high places, but he's not perfect. In chapter 16, we see the lapse of this man's faith relative to Sarai and Hagar, the Egyptian maid. We have here the unbelief of both Sarai and Abram and the birth of Ishmael. This is certainly a letdown after the wonder of the previous chapter.
And this section is entitled Sarai's Suggestion.
Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. That's Genesis 16:1. Abram got two things down in the land of Egypt, which really caused him trouble. One was wealth, and the other was a little Egyptian maid. Sarai said to Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. And I pray thee, go into my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. Then Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. Genesis 16:2. The thing that Sarai suggested was the common practice of that day. When a wife couldn't bear a child, there was a concubine. Now don't say that God approved it. God did not approve of this at all. This was Sarai's idea, and Abram listened to her. As head of the home here, he followed her suggestion. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. Genesis 16:3. This little Egyptian maid becomes a concubine, and this is not according to God's will. God is not going to accept the offspring at all, and He didn't. He wouldn't. Why? Because it was wrong. Don't say that God approved this. All you can say is that this is the record because it's historical fact. He went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Genesis 16:4. Hagar said, I've mothered a child of Abram, and Sarai couldn't do it. She looked down on Sarai, you see. Sarai said unto Abram, my wrong be upon thee. I've given my maid into thy bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes, and the Lord judged between me and thee. Did you try again? 16:5. What in the world? Don't pass this verse by. Don't assume that God approved of this. God says that it's wrong, and now Sarai sees that she has done wrong. My wrong be upon thee. She is wrong, my friend. God will not accept this, and it's going to be a real heartbreak to old Abram. But you see, Abram and Sarai are not really trusting God as they should. After all, Abram at this time is nearly 90 years old. Sarai is 80. I think they've come to the conclusion they're not going to have a child. Sarai could probably rationalize and say, I think maybe this is the way God wants us to do it. For this is the custom of the day. It was the custom of the day, but it was contrary to God's way of doing things. We get the wrong impression if we think that just because something is recorded in the Bible, God approves of it. The Bible is inspired in that it's accurate record. There are many things God does not approve of that are recorded in His Word. The moral applications that you and I read into this are not quite here in the historical record. Abram and Sarai were brought up in Ur of the Chaldees, where this was a common practice, and the moral angle is not the thing that for them was so wrong. The terrible thing was they just did not believe God. The wrong they committed by Abram taking Sarai's maid Hagar was a sin, and God treated it as such. But today, we reverse the emphasis and say that taking a concubine is a sin, but we do not pay too much attention to the unbelief. Yet the unbelief was the major sin here. That is, it was lots blacker than the other.
And that concludes J. Vernon McGee's commentary on verses 1 through 5. And now I'd like to look at Chuck Smith's commentary on verses 1 through 5. You know, this is the second time man hearkened to his wife, and it was a mistake. Later, God will tell Abraham to hearken to his wife. You know, Sarai is obviously the one that's barren. The curse of barrenness in that culture. Remember, Rachel was barren. Then I think Rebecca was.
I was thinking Rebecca.
There was a lot of women who were barren during this time. It's kind of unusual. Of course, we're still having that. You know, it seems to be brought on by a contraceptive, but
not back then, though.
But not back then.
No.
So maybe it's something that's God doesn't bring. I always thought that God didn't bring my children into the world until He was ready. You know, that's and so for them, and so that's what we might be saying here in these cases. Now, one of the things is you know, it's Chuck Smith talks about that. You know, this is the second time we've had women to cause men to kind of
tell their husbands what to
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and we kind of saw that in the Epstein files. I don't know if you saw it, but there, you know, it seems to be that it is the wives that got their husbands involved in
You're
the
kidding.
in these things with Epstein.
Why?
In order to control this religion seems to be propagated by women. You go back to who was the guy that built the tower?
Tower of Babel?
Yeah, Nabal.
Nabal, yeah.
Nabal, his mother, was the one that got him involved in the false religion of the Babylonians and that sort of thing. Most false religions, the Temple of Diane was ran by women. That's why in Corinth that he had special certain things that he told women, how to dress and that sort of thing, because they were the priestess of the temple. They were the ones that did all of the things in the temple. Well, it came out in the Epstein files, that his girlfriend was actually involved. Her father was involved with Mossad, and so she probably got Epstein involved with this. And then, Bill Clinton was a nobody, and his wife got him involved, and then and raised him up. And then you've got, just time. It seems to be that these cults, and that's what if you've ever been involved with the occults, they have the seduction of the women to get the men sucked into these occults. We know of a witch here in Berea, but but we don't know of a warlock. We know of a woman who's involved in Satan worship. And so that's the danger of it. Now, later on, and I have found that you tend to have, and Jay Vernon says this about his wife, you seem to have better discernment than most. You can look, you can tell by looking at a woman, what her intentions are a lot better than a man can. And so we're kind of deceived in that aspect. But, that is something that you need to realize, that a lot of these things, a lot of times, we want to blame the man and, and say he's a pervert and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of these cases, the woman has got them involved in it. So both are at fault, just like eating the apple was both of their fault.
Yeah, right.
And
Not one or the other.
Here, Abraham didn't say no.
Right. He's like, okay.
He's like, okay.
Hagar
no
it
problem.
is.
I can do that.
I can do it. I'm your man.
Yeah, I'm your man. And so, but we have to be careful with these things. This is very, very modern advice. If we were like J. Vern McGee, if we were not reading through the Bible, this might be a chapter that we wouldn't never read. We would leave out. We would never read. We would never talk about. But that's the reason expository sermons are so important, is because I wouldn't talk about half of what's in here if I didn't just read everything that is in here, and then that forces you to talk about it in some way.
Absolutely.
And so with that, and that's why God included the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yep.
And this is the ugly part right here.
It's the ugly part.
But it's very contemporary. We have, families that are, we know families that have trouble, with this, that they get involved in this sort of sordid affair, and it's something that people need to be aware that it's been going on all along, and how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So the next